Welcome. This is the second part in a series, a small series, on the book The New Zealand Project by Max Harris. A wonderful book. We've already talked about incorporating values into the New Zealand political media landscape, even our justice landscape. This is at the end, this is what Max writes at the end of the first chapter. I haven't lived long enough yet to have lost a sense of hope or a sense of the possible. But I've lived long enough to know that things are moving too slowly for those of us with hope who want to make the impossible possible. And I've lived close enough to death to feel like we have no time to lose. Welcome, Max Harris. We have no time to lose. There's an urgency with the election that's happening in New Zealand. I want to pick up on what we talked about last time, the values that are needed in New Zealand politics. How do we bed those in? Let's talk about the 4 values you picked up on.
So the values of care, community, creativity and love are going to be interpreted in different ways by different people. But I think we need to have a discussion about what we want to flow from those values. And importantly, I don't think we can take those values forward without having a conversation about decolonisation. And the reason I think that's so important, I could say what I mean by that, is decolonisation is about the Māori worldview in New Zealand and the relationship between Māori and others. And I think we know that Māori have perspectives on values that have been very long-standing, and we make the most of those perspectives if we commit to decolonisation.
And we have not made the most of them because colonisation in its myriad forms, it's tied up in the economic, the political, the cultural, the social and the intellectual. Just give us some examples of what colonisation has done in some of those fields. Just some grunty examples there.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I'm not Māori, so I don't have the sort of family stories that have been passed down to many Māori about how people have been really personally affected. But I have spoken to people like Moana Jackson. I've read the work of people like Ani Makaere who've written really beautifully about this. And I mean, there are a number of things we could talk about. I mean, a whole lot of land was confiscated in huge swathes and bought up unfairly, and it was problematic in itself in New Zealand history, especially in the 19th century, because you know, land was important to Māori life and to anyone's lives, but it was particularly problematic because of how important the land is to our Māori in the Māori world. The word for land in Māori whenua also means placenta, and there is an idea of people being intimately connected to the land. So we have the phrase tangata whenua, people of the land, the idea that people actually kind of belong to the land. So that's one example, the loss of land, which we can't get away from. Then,
I'll just stop you there. That's a deeply significant shift, isn't it? Instead of the land belonging to the people or the person, the people belong to the land. We are temporary occupants of this amazing land.
That's right. And you know, when I've spoken to Māori audiences, like recently at Te Whare Wānanga or Awanui Ārangi, people kept coming back in their discussion about values to the environment because in the views of many Māori, we can't talk about issues like housing or issues like healthcare without connecting it back up to our lived environment. And you know, that is at the core of the Te Ao Māori. And I think it's a view that can help other people in New Zealand to see the kind of centrality of the environment and the land and
Take that a bit
lives.
deeper for me. So they want to talk about housing, but it is connected to the land. Show me how that plays out a little bit.
Yeah, so perhaps away from housing, although I can come back to housing, an example is in how work is done. I went to Whakatane and spoke to someone who had worked at the sawmill there and knew people involved with sawmill workers, and the poisons that had come out of sawmill work were seen to not just harm individuals, and we know that created a lot of harm for individuals, but also the land, and in doing so it was seen as a kind of blight on life in that community. So you know, what might just be seen as kind of an economic problem or an error of judgment in the business space is also connected up in this worldview to the environment and how people live. Yeah.
It's such a sort of sad genesis of the colonists in a way. We came out of industrialised England, and again it ties in with neoliberalism in a way. It was about money and profit and what you could make from the new lands, the new countries. But we met these people who were deeply connected with a love, with an aroha for the land.
Exactly.
The clash of cultures, wasn't it? How do we affect that decolonisation? How do we stop that clash of worldviews now?
So I think, and this is drawing on the work of people like Moana Jackson, we have to break down that word a little bit, because it's a word that maybe is not commonly used in mainstream media, even if Māori have used it. So what the word means is, drawing on those people's work, is understanding and undoing the negative effects of colonisation.
So within that there's an acknowledgement.
There's a deep acknowledgement. That's maybe the sort of negative side, and then the positive side is recentering the views of Indigenous peoples, in our case Māori, and then extending that to different parts of our society. So we have to understand how colonisation has affected us and has seeped into the present, and that takes us to land, that takes us to language and te reo Māori, and how te reo Māori was not just neglected but also suppressed actively, that's right, in schools. It takes us to people and how people were pushed into urban environments, away from marae, away from cultural connection.
Away from their elders.
Exactly. And it means understanding as best as we can the trauma that came from that, the harms to kind of people's sense of identity and security as people, and working to try to undo that. And that's the really hard part, and that's the part that has to be also led by Māori, who understand this experience best and who want a different way. But some of the things that people have talked to me about as ways of achieving decolonisation have been changing how we think about education, so that we centre Māori stories and history properly in our education system, teaching the language, the Māori language, te reo Māori, in schools, and going beyond that, ensuring that Māori have leadership in the new politics that we want to build.
Let's take that middle one, the teaching of te reo. What would that do for all New Zealand children? What are the beautiful benefits that flow from that, Max?
So the first thing I'd say is the way we talk about this issue is often a bit loaded. So we often have people asking, should te reo Māori be compulsory in schools? And I think that's not just loaded, but also a bit misleading, because actually all public education is compulsory. We go to school and we have to learn certain things. So the question should be, do we want te reo Māori to be part of our public education system?
The question more though is often, what point learning Māori when it won't help us in the world? We can't use it in any other country. Why should we do that? Better to learn Chinese, Mandarin Chinese.
Sure.
What's your answer?
What I'd say to that is there's definitely a point to learning it. There's a point to learning it from the perspective of other languages, because we know that if you learn one language, you're better equipped to learn further languages. It's a way of thinking that you ease into by learning one language like te reo Māori. We also know there's a point to it because we are in a special place in the Pacific. We are not a little Britain in Europe. And in this place, we have the intermingling of peoples, and Māori is the language of this land. So we help us to understand each other better if we learn this language. And on top of that, and there are other te reo Māori experts who could speak to this better than me, but there is so much cultural richness that we can all gain by learning the language, because as a Māori whakatauki or proverb goes, the language is a window into the culture. And so we pick up things like the fact that land is also the placenta in the Māori word whenua, or we pick up the fact that in the word whakapapa, which refers to kind of genealogy or personal history, there's also the idea of grounding ourselves, making ground, whakapapa. These are kind of ways of thinking that we absorb just by learning the words and the language. And there are so many other good things that come from this. I mean, I think for Māori, and many have said this, there's a greater sense of security and confidence that can come, not just from Māori speaking te reo Māori, but also from Pākehā speaking te reo Māori. So I've learned a little bit of te reo Māori, and I'm by no means an expert, but when I was speaking to a group of Māori students, one person said to me, when you speak te reo Māori as a Pākehā, you say to me that I'm important. And I think that's a sense that lots of Māori people have, and that if Pākehā learned the language, that would be an expression that this culture is important, and it's important to our future.
And that goes right back to bedding in the first of those values, which is care, which is manaakitanga, which has that beautiful concept of I respect you, I look up to you. So it's a tangible way to show that respect.
It shows a deep concern for the other, that's right, for another person.
For the cynic who says, that's all very well, that can that actually change the bedrock of a society, that sort of respect, we're talking about decolonisation.
Yeah.
The meeting
Yeah.
of the cultures
Yeah.
suddenly is less of a clash
Yeah.
and more of a softening, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'd see it as repairing the bedrock, that's always been there, but that's been kind of chipped away at, right? And some Māori talk about the pie, the kind of middle space, sometimes described as like the space between the land and the sky. And I think, values-based politics arguably occur on that pie, on that middle ground, because there is a tradition in Māoridom as well as in Pākehā non-Māori worlds. And learning Māori language and being a society that speaks both Māori and language would allow us to come together in that pie and try to move forward in ways that draw on the best of all traditions in the country.
I want to take something, Max, within this, which is the very Western way at the moment of looking at a country's success as a purely economic success. To me, this is a way to look at a country's success from a totally different perspective, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I think how we think about success, either success for individuals or success as a country, says a lot about our values. And I think we have become a bit confused about what markers of success matter. And to the extent that we have settled on some markers of success, they tend to be around wealth, individual wealth or societal wealth. And this is slightly drifting to another topic, but I think GDP, gross domestic product, which is really just a measure of consumption, of how much we're consuming, isn't a very good metric of the health of the economy. And I think bringing in thinking about values and also trying to draw on Māori approaches to values can give us a broader view.
The reason I brought that in is because Māori, iwi, are actually very successful, some of them, economically. So if we have this softening of the cultural clash, a decolonisation, the flow-on benefits, even economically, with us all working together, can be good, can't they?
Yeah. So we know the Māori economy is one of the fastest growing parts of the
Very
New Zealand
much.
economy. And I mean, in this history of cultural clash, there is a lot of repairing that needs to be done. There's a lot of healing that can be done.
And there's a
so
certain separation of economies at the moment, isn't there? Because there hasn't been this meeting.
There is. And it might be that some Māori want to continue to have some space to pursue their own projects. In fact, under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, Māori are assured tino rangatiratanga chieftainship to lead and to have authority. And so I think that should be allowed and secured. But I think decolonisation allows a better conversation across cultures and a better reckoning with our past.
And the potential for each economy to amplify the other, to work together as one country. That's why I'm trying to weave it into decolonisation, because there are so many ways decolonisation works. Tell us a little bit more about your inspiration for this whole chapter in the book on decolonisation. Why did you feel this is such a crucial marker for a different kind of New Zealand?
Yeah, so I think one reason is I grew up in a primary school in Wellington, Clyde Key, which had a real focus on Māoritanga, on Māori stories. So we learned about kupe, we learned about Maui, and we learned about rangi and papatuanuku. And we also had kapahaka, and we sang waiata. And
Tell us the story of your big mouth, Max. It's a sweet story in the book.
So I was asked to be the sort of Pākehā co-leader of the school haka, which was a moment of real pride for me. And I do remember this teacher, Whaia Rewin, saying to me, "You've got the biggest mouth I've ever seen," probably because I was so passionate about wanting to represent the school.
It's being well used now.
But what I say in the chapter...
So that love came into you for this Māoritanga.
Yeah, or at least a sense of curiosity and respect,
Yes.
And it was something that I wanted to... continue to be committed to learning about, and it was something in a way that made me feel bigger as a person. I mean, I was aware that I wasn't Māori, and I didn't want to pretend to be anything but Pākehā, but it was something that I knew could help all of us grow. So I continued learning about New Zealand history and then doing some Te Reo Māori at university. And actually my thinking about decolonisation has also been influenced by some South African friends, black South African friends that I've met in the UK, where in South Africa there's a much more lively conversation about decolonisation. There's a different context there, but there is more talk about whiteness and privilege and what it means to try to shift a society that has very open wounds.
Yes.
And I think there's something we can learn from that here too.
And a shift away from colonial thinking altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
I want, though, to go into something that is on the rise around the globe, especially with Trump in power, and that is this structural racism. And there are many attempts, we've seen it lately with the statues in America. How do we deal with the rise of that, apparent rise of that, Max?
Yeah, I'm glad you say apparent rise, because I think actually we've had this sort of endemic racism for a long time, and in some ways it's only kind of coming to the surface with Trump, and Trump is only a symptom of a kind of culture beneath that. So yeah, I mean, I do think for a long time in America there's been strongly felt and also institutionally backed racism towards African Americans and Native Americans, Latino Americans and others. And I think technology, camera phones, spreading of messages on social media, and other tools have just made this more real and harder to deny. And I mean, there aren't any sort of silver bullets for changing this, but the first step is owning up to what happened in the history of places we're talking about, like Aotearoa New Zealand or America, talking about what happened, to put it simply, talking about the fact that in New Zealand, you know, huge parts of the country were confiscated and land was lost, and acknowledging that that has had an impact on the shape of the present, same in the US. So I think actually Pākehā people in New Zealand and white people in America do have a responsibility to have those conversations in their own communities, and that's partly what I want to do with this book. I do want it to speak to lots of different communities, but I do want to speak to Pākehā and say, hey, we actually need to have a conversation about understanding colonisation, understanding the unjust benefits sometimes acquired by Pākehā, and we need to call each other out when there are racist comments, when there are racist actions, and we need to help each other to be better in this. And that's something that Māori have been talking about and calling for a long time. And some Pākehā in history have been working on this too, but I think we need to kind of renew our energies.
And this is where artists too can help. I remember as a youngster when I heard Tim Finn's song Parihaka. I had never heard of Parihaka in my schooling.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
those were peaceful Māori who were invaded by the British Army.
That's right.
And betrayed.
That's
those wounds go through generations. The healing is partly this korero, but what else is it? What else is, for example, Te Tiriti, the treaty, what is needed there? Because there are Kiwis saying, they've been paid out, it's done, it's dusted, let's just close the book on it. What would you say to that, Max?
Yeah, well, I'd say, in the words of Moana Jackson, treaties aren't settled, they're honoured, and they are covenants, they're promises that were exchanged between two people and intended to have enduring force, intended to have power over time. And if we want to honour that, and I think we do because there are some beautiful things in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, then we need to recommit every generation to making this document a living document in our lives. What does that actually mean? Well, there are some facts that are pretty clear. One is that it was Te Tiriti o Waitangi that was signed, the Māori version of the treaty, and that version should be the version that we all recognise as the key version of the treaty. And actually it's not that complicated. So that gave power of government, although there is some debate around translating, but essentially gave power of government to the Crown, and it gave power of chieftainship, absolute chieftainship over taonga and treasures to Māori, and at the same time assured Māori equality. And I think actually there are seeds of really important ways of living in that document.
Give me an example of a beautiful seed.
Well, I think just the idea of good government comes out of that Article 1, the idea of sharing power, which we now start to see being expressed in, say, the Awa Tupua, the Whanganui River Agreement, which has given the Whanganui River the status of a legal person, an idea of power sharing, the idea of a commitment to equality, which I think a lot of New Zealanders can get behind. So I think what we need to thread out of this document is, are these principles and values, and to say, you know what, this is not just a kind of document you have to memorise as a relic from history. It's something that has ongoing vitality and it can have ongoing assistance in guiding how we live our lives. You know, Anne Salmon talks about voyaging stars or navigating lights, and I feel like Te Tiriti o Waitangi can play that role for us, sort of navigating lights that guide our journey together.
When you
forward.
were talking just now about a covenant, I suddenly got an idea of it's really like a couple getting married at the altar. It's not just frozen on that day. There is the beginning at that point of promising. There's the beginning of an unfolding.
Yeah,
so you're saying this can unfold, this relationship, using the Te Tiriti throughout future generations.
Exactly. And
it's never static. It's never over.
No. And
that's a beautiful concept.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I mean, I think, you know, Obama in the US and Justice Joe Williams here has talked about, a kind of project that remains unfinished to be perfected, and that is true of the New Zealand project as well. It's something that, you know, we chip into, that we try to better with each generation, and we need some principles and some backbone to take us forward on that. But I think the treaty and Te Tiriti o Waitangi can provide that. Yeah.
And if you've just joined us, this is the book, The New Zealand Project by Max Harris, looking at these beautiful, enriching ideas for bringing a country forward into a new way of being. In a way, it's finding what we were, isn't it again? A community that deeply cared, but refining that. Would you agree with that? It's looking back and forward, this New Zealand Project.
Yeah. I'm always a bit cautious about being nostalgic, because, you know, that can so often be tied to
glibness.
Yeah, glibness, and also an inability to kind of face the future. But I agree that it's finding the best in our past, and I think some of our best moments in our past have been moments where we've been deeply caring, whether that's in committing to be nuclear free, or achieving the ACC system, implementing the ACC accident compensation system, and it's about recovering those best moments in our past and using those to go forward.
Having said that, though, if we're talking decolonisation, it's pretty horrifying, the history of the treaty, because it was largely ignored till about 1975, wasn't it? It was just sort of put aside.
That's right, at least by the government. So one thing that is true is that Māori continued to refer to Te Tiriti o Waitangi
But that would have been a suppurating wound for them, because they weren't being honoured or heard.
That's right, and they took petitions to international institutions, to the UK, to the Queen, and they believed that this was a meaningful document, which is what was intended. And there were moments, and I mentioned this in the book, where the Te Tiriti seemed to be honoured, but there was no consistent commitment to it from 1840 to 1975, despite those repeated Māori efforts. And then, in 1975, mainly because of the strong efforts of grassroots Māori activists and campaigners, there was a push to kind of re-centre Te Tiriti again in our national consciousness. And we got the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal, which was there to look at whether the conduct of government was fitting of treaty principles, of those principles. And then that has led to, I think, a whole new set of conversations, not yet perfected, not yet as good as they can be, but it has opened up the conversation that I'm probably trying to continue with the book.
Max, I lived in Australia for 10 years, where the voice of Aboriginals is so silenced, and again a very rich Indigenous culture that could have offered so much. I never heard one white Australian use one Aboriginal word until I became so homesick for this country. And it gave me this wonderful gratitude that we have a Māori people who are so strong, that they would continue, as you say, over years and years to stand for their principles. We're very blessed to have that, aren't we? A people who would stand up to the incoming populace.
Yes, and of course, I mean, as you know, the story of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders is also a really impressive story of survival, and there have been great efforts there too. But what we do have in New Zealand, I suppose, is a slightly more mainstreamed appreciation of Māori culture, even though there's such a long way to go. Some things like the haka, I think, and the fact that the New Zealand national anthem is now spoken in Māori have helped to inch forward the kind of appreciation of another worldview. But there is so much still to go, so much of a way still to go.
You make a good point in your book that can sometimes become a bit like just a pretty little mascot. We say beautiful Māori phrases, but then do we really feel that? We do the haka, are we really connecting with what that is?
Exactly, and it's...
How do we deepen that? I mean, te reo is one way to deepen it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, te reo Māori is meant to be, an official language, and an official language shouldn't be just wheeled out, for ceremonial purposes. You know, an official language should be something that seeps right through the kind of lifeblood of the country. So that's one thing. And then I think it requires Pākehā to have a real willingness to try to own the worst of our history, and also be more willing to change things going forward.
It's like a family that's had a bit of abuse or something very dysfunctional. There's a healing in the acknowledgement. But let's go further. You mentioned getting more backbone in all of this. What about the idea of a constitution for this country? Can you address that, which you also look at in the book as a possibility?
So without getting too legal, you know, New Zealand has a constitution at the moment, but we don't have it all written down in one place. And actually, when you ask even the experts, they struggle to explain what's at the margins of our constitution, as you know. So the descriptions often kind of trail off. But the UK system has always offered that. There's a certain flexibility, there's a certain malleability to that, which means you can meet new conditions. And some people say a constitution would be too rigid, like the American Constitution has a rigidity to it. So can you take us through that, the pluses and minuses of it? So the flexibility is positive in good times when you want to act quickly or speedily. It might not be so good, when it means that something very negative can be done pretty quickly, like in 2004 when then highest national court, the Court of Appeal, made a decision about the Foreshore and Seabed, and the government could very quickly overrule that decision and remove the right of Māori to go to court through the Foreshore and Seabed Act to investigate their customary rights. That was the flexibility of our constitution that allowed that. And when people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it about our constitution, which does come up, I always wonder, from whose perspective is this not broke? Because actually a lot of Māori, a lot of people in prison, a lot of Pacifica people would say, in some ways our system of what constitutes us, which is basically what the Constitution is pretty broken. So let's look at the other side then. What would a Constitution do for Māori? Let's begin with that. So I should say in all of this, I'm not a complete advocate of a single written Constitution. I can come back to that, but I definitely see there being some good things about it. So one thing is it would stop abuse of power being so easily achieved as it is at the moment. So at the moment, I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that if a government wants to pass a law that violates fundamental human rights, they can do that and nothing will stop it. There's no upper house in New Zealand. The courts couldn't strike down that law. They might be able to say it violates human rights, but they couldn't do anything about it. And what a constitution would do, especially if it allowed, a written constitution, if it allowed judges to strike down laws, to cross out laws, it would make that abuse of power harder.
So in a way, the politicians are then subject to very good scrutiny from the legal side. That's wonderful. More
scrutiny, at least a second look. So at the moment, we've got some systems within Parliament, like the Select Committee system, where we review laws, but there's not a chance for a second look once a law has been passed, and so we end up with quite worrying laws on our books in New Zealand. And so I think abuse of power is especially relevant to Māori who've had to bear the brunt of that abuse over time. But there are other things as well. I mean, one thing from a less technical perspective is a constitution helps to give a sense of shared principles in society. And in this way, it's not that far from a values-based politics, because both of them are about saying, can we get some high-level agreement on the things we have in common, and can we use those things we have in common to work out what to do? Care, community, creativity, or commitment to human rights. And that's another good thing about a constitution.
And would te tiriti, would the treaty principles be woven into that constitution? That would have to be a foundational part of it.
Yeah, well, that takes us to kind of another conversation about the process of doing building a constitution. So we know that actually a majority of Māori are not supportive of a written constitution at the moment. We know that because there was this amazing report of Mātika Mai Aotearoa, a group coordinated by Moana Jackson and Margaret Mutu, and that went around and it surveyed thousands of especially young Māori, and that came up with some really imaginative ideas which I think should be part of the conversation, like do we need 3 branches of government? How should we redesign Parliament? But what they did say is that they weren't sure about a written constitution, and in particular it was likely that Te Tiriti o Waitangi would probably sit behind that written constitution. So my view on it is there are clear pros of having a written constitution, but we need to continue talking about it. And in particular, we need to create space for Māori to say what a constitution would look like that would belong in this land. Because I think that's the important thing. Like when we talk about constitutions, often we just talk about kind of copying and pasting kind of old template documents from the other side of the world, but actually we want to get a document that is about how we want power to be exercised and disciplined in this country based on our unique history. And that requires more than copying and pasting a template from overseas. What
a beautiful note to end a discussion on decolonisation, which is one of the chapters in Max Harris's book, The New Zealand Project. Thank you so much, Max.
Thanks so much. Thanks.